By reading our Bibles with a consistent, normal interpretation, we recognize similarities and differences. And one of the differences is how God's planned for us to live today, that we live by grace. If you don't understand this, if this is new, go back to the beginning of the series and start over where we introduce how this interpretation is. But most of you, I assume, have been with us for a while, and so all of this makes sense. And we live by grace, but we also, we're told, live by faith today. To live by faith, we have to know some promises from God. And we've looked at promises about how we're living. We are now looking at some promises with regard to our future, or at least now and our future in terms of our security, our eternal security. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and understanding eternal security means that my salvation was provided by God and is made secure by God. There's at no point that I have anything to do with securing my salvation. God provided it. I believe that message. He saved me, and He keeps me saved. That's His work. And that's really, I think, just to be very honest, that I think is the biggest problem with any that deny eternal security, is we're really saying it's not God's work, it's our work. But salvation is God's work. Do we get to cooperate in what God's doing along the way? Yes, you and I have that opportunity to cooperate with what He's doing. But it's God's work. We put in today in Romans 8:28, which maybe you're familiar with Romans 8:28. It's an oft-quoted verse, but many of us don't realize this is a passage that, to some degree, has something to say about eternal security. Let's just read through the passage, and then we'll kind of go back and talk a little bit about it. Verse 28, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. For those whom He foreknew, He also predestined to become conformed to the image of His Son, that He would be the firstborn among many brothers. And the New American Standard 2020 editions add sisters. And these whom He predestined, He also called, and these whom He called, He also justified or declared righteous, and those He justified, He also glorified. So what shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare His own Son, but delivered Him up over for us all, how will He not also with Him freely give us all things? Who will bring a charge against God's elect? God is the one who justifies or declares righteous. He's going to entertain a charge against you after He's declared you righteous. And who is the one who condemns? Christ Jesus. Well, He's the judge. Is the one who died, rather is raised, who is at the right hand of God, who also intercedes for us. In other words, what Paul is arguing is, if there's anything that can be against you, if there's anything that can keep you from making it, if there's anything that can cause you to fail from being secure in your salvation, then what do you do with the fact that we're overpowering God? He's the one that declared us righteous, and Jesus Christ is going to He's going to condemn us, we should say, even though He's done all this for us and He's interceding for us. The point being is, if God the Father and God the Son have done and are doing these things with regard to us, what makes us think that we can fight against them and undo what they've done? But there's much more to this whole text. And if we back up a little ways before all of this, let's go back up here to verse 21. It says that the creation itself will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers pains of childbirth together right up until now. In other words, when we look at creation out there, we don't know what it means to groan, but you see creation. I mean, we're in the gardening season, and I go out to my garden, and I've got some things that come up every year, but I've got things that come up in there I didn't plant. They're called weeds, and I can just pull weeds, and I can come back the next day, and there's more weeds coming up. That's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be gardening to try to raise something that we can eat, something we can enjoy and appreciate. But weeds just want to volunteer. And it's suffering then in these pains of childbirth right up and down. Creation isn't exactly what it should be. It says, but not only that, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits, even we ourselves, we groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for the adoption, or literally the placement as sons, not sons and daughters, because this is very, very pointed term here for sonship, had to do with that relationship in which one had an elevated status in the family, the redemption of the body. That is, the body not only being paid for, but now experiencing the release that comes with that, the freedom that comes with that. Now, when he says we're groaning in ourselves, yeah, most of you, probably some of you, unless you're really young, we groan because it's like, my shoulder hurts, my hip hurts, we got things that don't work right, I remember when I didn't used to have to wear glasses, and now I can see off at a distance, but a lot of stuff I cannot see very well without glasses. I can't read a book without them. It's things like that we groan. We get that kind of groaning. But if you're familiar with the book of Romans, starting back in chapter 5, all the way here into chapter 8, so think of that, chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, Paul has been talking about the problem of the sin nature. And I believe, if you remember what Paul says at the end of chapter 5, when he says, "Oh, wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death?" What is that but groaning? The biggest groaning in the life of most believers, whether they admit it or not, is, as one of my friends says, our own stinking sin nature. The Bible doesn't use the word stinking, but that's the word that she throws in there. Yeah, and our sin nature does stink because it comes up and it rears its head and it's always coming along and ruining when we're trying to do something good, and we're just like, oh, I'm tired of this. Tired of it sometimes a lot more than I'm tired of a foot that hurts or something like that. Yeah, we groan in our bodies, and we're waiting for the redemption of the body. But you realize when our body's redeemed at that same time, the sin nature's gone. That's the whole point. It's not just that the physical ailments, physical struggles of the body are gone, but the spiritual struggle with that sinful nature is gone. And that's what we're looking for. And as we're waiting for that, then he says, "For in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope." In other words, we don't have it yet. For who hopes for what he already sees? In other words, if we already have this deliverance from the sin nature, if it's already permanent in us, then why are we hoping for it? But we're hoping for it because we don't yet have it. But if we hope for what we do not see, then through perseverance or patience we continue to eagerly wait for it. Verse 26. Now, in the same way, the Spirit also helps our weakness. What, our weakness of our sin nature? Well, yeah, but there's a specific aspect of that. For we do not know what to pray for as we should. Now, we've talked about this word pray, and it's a word I really believe has to do with talking about the character of God. It's directed to the character of God. That's what this communication is about. And when we're groaning with our stinking sin nature, maybe groaning because of a shoulder or a hip or something like that, however we're groaning, sometimes in the midst of that groaning, and for some people it's obviously more intense than others, it is sometimes hard for us to get straight in our minds. What should I say about God? What should I be thinking about God? What do I know about the character of God that maybe has some bearing on what I'm going through right now? And so we sometimes don't know. That is sometimes our weakness. We don't know how to pray or talk about the character of God as we should. But the Spirit himself intercedes, intercedes. He's going in there to strike for exactly what we need for us with, he also groans, but groanings that are literally, you can't utter him. You can't put him into words, what he says. And he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he intercedes for the saints according to God, or as is by a God standard. So what he's getting at is the Spirit. When you're groaning and you're like, I need to think about God, but I don't even know where to start some days because it hurts so bad. He is going to then, verse 28, he's going to work some things together for your good. to those who are loving God. That is, those that want to think about God. They're in that position right now where they're actually wanting to love God. They want to be doing this right now. They don't want to be operating with their sin nature. They don't want to be struggling with this right at this moment. And they would like to do this. And he's going to work some things together for good so that they can turn and go, God, thank you for that. Because you are a good God. You've done this thing in my life. Because you're a faithful God. You have kept this, because we're talking about faith and promises, you've kept this promise to me in this instance. God always will keep his promises. But sometimes we are the ones that have to believe that promise in that situation to relate to and benefit from it. And so he goes through all of these things. And one of the things he's saying is, when you go through this, stop and think about this. This is one of the aspects of God's goodness. For whom he foreknew. Now this does not mean he saw something out ahead of time. There's a different word for that in the New Testament. This is a word meaning that it's as though God had a relationship with you before you even were around. It's based on the Greek word gnosko, which has to do with an experiential knowledge, not an oida, not just looking out through some spiritual long-range binoculars. And he also then predestined, or he set out the boundaries for our life to be conformed to the image of his Son. The boundaries he's put around is all designed to move us in that direction. We sometimes are not moving in that direction. But he set up boundaries, and he does keep moving us there despite what we might see or think, so that he should be the firstborn among many brethren. And whom he predestined, or set out those boundaries, he also called. He called us. And whom he called, he has declared us righteous. Remember that. He's the one that has declared you righteous. He called you to salvation. And whom he justified, he also glorified. Yeah. See, from God's point of view, all of these are written in a way that they just look at, he did this, he did this, he did this, he did this. And it just looks at that work as a unit, and he sees it from his point of view as good as done. How can he do that if we could lose our salvation? Can't. But he does do it because he does know that he's going to secure our salvation. All of this is really about what he's doing. And these are some of the good things that he's working in your life. And these are the things that then cause us to turn around and go, God, thank you. Because my stinking sin nature is making me so miserable. But I know because of you, you will get me there. Despite the fact that I've got days that my sin nature runs around, like, as we were saying last week with the soul, like a great big, think of it, Great Dane dragging you down the street by its leash. And you feel like that with your sin nature. Some days, just like with the soul. By the way, Peter does say that the sin nature, or the works of the flesh, attack through the soul. So there's a definite relationship to those things. Think about this. Isn't this an incredible thing? You sometimes are like, God, I don't even know where to start worshiping you. I don't even know where to start thinking about who you are, because, man, I'm struggling so much with this. But you really want to, and the Holy Spirit goes to bat and intercedes for something very specific in your life or mine that's going to bring us around to think about what God has done, what he considers as good as done, even though we're not yet there in terms of being glorified. And he will accomplish it. Man, you want to talk about security? Great passage on eternal security. So as always, set your mind on who you are so that you have a good day in the Lord as you're thinking also about what God's doing. And have a great day in the Lord doing that. And as always, thank you for joining me.